She was wearing the same necklace as the millionaire's deceased daughter. The truth made him cry. Before I begin, I want to thank two very special subscribers for being here. Laurie, thank you for supporting me. Junie, it's great to have you here. If you want to appear in the next video, leave your comment at the end of the story. Now, enjoy. The morning Corbin Westfall's life changed forever began the way all his mornings did, gray, heavy, and without mercy. His black SUV rolled slowly through downtown Hartford, Connecticut, flanked by two escort vehicles carrying his security detail. At 31, Corbin was the kind of man whose name appeared on the sides of buildings, whose phone calls could move markets before breakfast. But seated in his wheelchair near the wide rear window, surrounded by tinted glass and polished leather, he looked less like a titan and more like something precious and broken being transported very carefully from one place to another. 2 years. It had been exactly 2 years since the accident, and still, some mornings he reached across the empty space beside him before he remembered. Mr. Westfall, Draven Mace, his head of security, spoke from the front seat. "We're approaching the foundation building. Should I route us around back to avoid the morning crowd?" Corbin didn't answer. His eyes had caught on something outside the window. On the corner of Elm and Fifth, tucked in the shadow of a concrete parking structure, a small girl sat alone on a flattened cardboard box. She was barefoot. Her dress was faded to the color of old dishwater, far too thin for October in New England. A paper cup sat beside her right hand, and her chin was turned down, watching the legs of strangers pass her like she had learned, very young, that people moved faster when they didn't have to meet your eyes. Corbin felt the familiar tightening in his chest. He had trained himself to look away from things like this, small, quiet griefs that moved too close to the larger, permanent one he carried. But something held his gaze, and then the girl shifted slightly, and the pale October sunlight caught something at her throat. The world stopped. It was a necklace, a delicate gold chain, and hanging from it, a small oval pendant with a pale blue stone at its center, the color of a winter sky, cut in the shape of a teardrop. Simple, unusual, completely unmistakable. He had held that necklace in his hands at a funeral. He had placed it himself with shaking fingers around the neck of a small girl in a white dress, lying in a white casket, before they closed the lid, and he said goodbye to the only thing in the world that had ever truly belonged to him. "Stop the car." His voice came out strange, flat, like a man reading words he didn't understand. "Sir, we're in the middle of—" "Stop the car, Draven, right now." The convoy halted. Corbin was already reaching for the door. His wheelchair descended to the sidewalk with a mechanical hiss. The cold air hit him like a wall. He crossed the pavement quickly, his jaw set, his heart slamming against his ribs with a force that almost frightened him. The closer he got, the more certain he became. The chain, the pendant, the precise, impossible shade of that blue stone. She looked up when his shadow fell over her. Dark eyes, careful and exhausted. A face so thin it made his throat ache. 7 years old, maybe. No older. "Sir." One of his guards stepped forward. "Stay back." The words came out harder than he intended. He pulled the chair to a stop a few feet from her and leaned forward, bringing himself as close to her level as he could manage. He forced his voice to go soft, gentle, though nothing inside him was gentle right now. "Hi there, sweetheart," he said. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. But that necklace you're wearing, can you tell me where you got it?" The girl stared at him with those worn, watchful eyes. She pulled her paper cup to her chest. A long moment passed, the kind that stretches like held breath. Then, in a voice no bigger than a sparrow, "My mama gave it to me, before she went to heaven." Corbin Westfall, worth $4 billion, feared across every boardroom in New England, a man who had not wept in public since the graveside service 2 years ago, felt the ground disappear from beneath him. His hands found the armrests of his chair. His knuckles went white. Before she went to heaven. Because the last person he had seen wearing that necklace was his daughter, Alara. And Alara was dead. Or so everyone had told him. The little girl was watching him with those dark, patient eyes. And somewhere behind them, Corbin could feel it, the way you feel a storm before it arrives. She was holding something. A truth too large for such small hands. He just didn't know yet how much it would cost him to hear it. Corbin Westfall had negotiated hostile acquisitions, survived a stock crash that wiped $40 million from his portfolio in a single afternoon, and buried his daughter before his 30th birthday. He was not a man who panicked. But sitting on the cold sidewalk of Elm and Fifth with his wheelchair angled toward a barefoot 7-year-old, he could feel something cracking open inside him that he was not sure he could close again. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice came out steadier than he felt. The girl studied him for a long moment, the way small children study strangers, calculating risk with an instinct no child should have to develop. "Sable," she said. And then, after a pause, as if deciding to be generous, "Sable Voss." Corbin breathed. "That's a beautiful name. Are you hungry, Sable?" She looked down at the paper cup in her hands. It held 3 quarters and a dime. She gave a small, careful shrug, the kind that meant yes, but had learned not to ask. He turned to Draven, who stood 2 steps back with the stiff posture of a man professionally uncomfortable with everything that was happening. "Get her something hot. Whatever she wants from that cart on the corner." Draven went. Corbin turned back to Sable. She was watching him now with those dark, exhausted eyes that had no business living in a face so young. He wanted to ask her about the necklace again. He wanted to ask 100 things. But he had learned, in the worst year of his life, that grief and shock make people fragile in ways you cannot always see, and that 7-year-olds were no exception. So instead he asked, "Where do you sleep at night, Sable?" She pointed vaguely down the block. "There's a church, sometimes they let me in, sometimes they don't." The cracking sound inside Corbin's chest got louder. By the time Draven returned with a hot chocolate and a wrapped ham sandwich, Sable had lowered her guard precisely 1 inch, enough to accept both with both hands, and a whispered, "Thank you." She ate quickly, with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned that food could disappear. Corbin watched her and said nothing, letting her eat in peace. It was only when she finished, and tucked the last corner of the sandwich wrapper neatly under the edge of her cardboard, that she looked up at him with something new in her expression. Curiosity. "Why are you in that chair?" she asked. "I was in an accident," he said. "A car accident. 2 years ago." Something shifted behind her eyes. So briefly he almost missed it. "My mama was in a car accident too," Sable said quietly. 2 years ago." The wind off the street carried away whatever Corbin might have said next. He sat with those words the way you sit with something too large to lift, just holding the weight of it, not yet ready to move. "Sable," he said finally, "I'd like to find you somewhere warm to stay tonight. Somewhere with a real bed and a hot meal. Would that be okay?" She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked down at the necklace at her throat, touched it once, lightly, with 2 fingertips, like a reflex. "My mama told me not to take it off," she said. "No matter what." "You don't have to take it off," Corbin said. "I promise." She picked up her cup, 3 quarters and a dime, and stood. She was so small, so terribly, unbearably small. "Okay," she said. That night, in the east wing of his Hartford estate, Corbin Westfall sat at his desk in the dark for 3 hours, while a 7-year-old girl slept down the hall under a clean white blanket for the first time in God knew how long. He had not gone to the office. He had cancelled 4 meetings. He had sent his housekeeper, Nora, to buy appropriate clothes and food, and he had called his personal attorney, Leland Cross, and said 7 words. Find everything about a woman named Cecile Voss. Then he sat in the dark and stared at the photograph on his desk. Ilara at 5 years old, laughing on the porch with her arms out wide, wearing that necklace. Her mother, Corbin's late partner Diane, gone 3 years before even the accident, had given it to her on her 4th birthday. One of a kind, the jeweler had told them, handcrafted. The blue teardrop stone was a piece of aquamarine from a specific mine in Brazil set in 22-karat gold. There was no other necklace like it in the world. And yet, down the hall, a barefoot orphan slept with one around her neck. Corbin pressed his hands flat on the desk and tried to hold himself very still. Her mother gave it to her before she went to heaven. He had to know. Whatever the answer cost him, he had to know. Leland Cross arrived at 7:30 the following morning with a leather briefcase, a large coffee, and the particular expression he reserved for situations that had no clean legal solution. "Talk to me," Corbin said. Leland sat across from him at the kitchen table and set a thin manila folder between them. Cecile Voss, 34 years old at time of death, originally from Burlington, Vermont. No permanent address at time of the accident. Had been living out of a women's shelter in Hartford for approximately 8 months prior. He paused. She was a pedestrian. She was struck by the same vehicle that crossed into oncoming traffic and hit your car, Corbin. The police report lists her as a secondary victim. Corbin's jaw tightened. He knew the accident report by heart. He had read it so many times the words had fused into a single permanent bruise at the back of his mind. He had never noticed, had never thought to look for, a secondary victim. She survived the initial impact, Leland continued. She was admitted to Hartford General. She died 4 days later from internal injuries. He slid the folder open. She had no next of kin, no emergency contacts on file. The only record attached to her name was a 7-year-old girl listed as her dependent, a child named Sable. No registered birth certificate on file in Connecticut. Meaning the child fell through the cracks. Meaning there is no formal record that Sable Voss exists, Leland said carefully. No birth certificate, no school enrollment, no social services file. When Cecile died, no one came forward, and no one official went looking. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. "The necklace," Corbin said. Leland folded his hands. "That's the part I can't explain. Try. I've pulled the inventory from Ilara's burial service. You know what was itemized. The necklace, described in detail, is listed among the items placed with her." Leland looked at him steadily. "I cannot tell you how a child living on the streets of Hartford has what appears to be the same piece. That is not a legal question. That is a question I think you need to answer yourself." Down the hall, Corbin could hear Nora in the east room, the soft footsteps, the sound of a small voice asking something in a careful, tentative tone. Already learning the layout of the house. Already, without knowing it, making herself real in a space that had been empty for 2 years. "I want a private investigator," Corbin said. "Someone good. Someone who doesn't ask why." "I know someone," Leland said. "Randall Fitch. Former FBI, now independent. He's discreet. Get him." Leland nodded and closed the folder. Then he paused, his hand resting on the leather. "Corbin." The use of his first name meant what it always meant, that whatever came next was human, not professional. "What are you hoping to find?" Corbin looked toward the hallway, toward the sound of small footsteps and a small voice asking quiet questions of a housekeeper who was already, clearly, completely charmed. "I don't know yet," he said. But that wasn't entirely true. By mid-morning, Sable had eaten a full breakfast, asked 11 questions about the portrait of a ship in the hallway, and decided, apparently, that Nora was trustworthy. She followed the housekeeper through the kitchen with a look of intense concentration, watching everything with those careful dark eyes, learning the house the way a bird learns a new tree, branch by branch, testing weight before committing. Corbin watched from the doorway. She still had not removed the necklace, and she had not yet told him what else she knew. He could feel it, the held breath of a secret, sitting in her small chest like a stone. Something her mother had told her. Something she was deciding, in her own quiet time, whether to trust him with. Be patient, he told himself. She's 7 years old, and she has no one. But the investigator Randall Fitch would begin pulling threads tomorrow. And somewhere, buried in those threads, Corbin Westfall was increasingly certain he was going to find something that would unmake and remake everything he thought he understood about the worst night of his life. 3 days passed. Sable learned where the good light was in the mornings, the tall east window in the breakfast room, where the sun came in flat and gold and warm. She learned that Nora kept buttercrackers in the second pantry drawer, and that Draven, who looked like a wall someone had taught to wear a suit, would smile, a real smile, slow and surprised, if you showed him a drawing you had made. She was, Corbin observed quietly, a child of remarkable intelligence and remarkable damage, and the two things lived in her simultaneously without apparent contradiction. She could be extraordinarily still and watchful one moment, and then suddenly, briefly, entirely a 7-year-old, chasing a beam of light across the floor, or asking with complete seriousness whether a spider could be someone's pet. He began eating breakfast in the breakfast room instead of his office. He told himself it was for practical reasons, to build trust, to create an opportunity for her to share what she knew about the necklace without pressure. That was not entirely a lie. "Do you like eggs?" he asked on the third morning. Sable, seated across from him with her hands around a glass of orange juice, considered the question gravely. Scrambled. Not runny. "Nora," Corbin called toward the kitchen. "Not runny." "I heard the man," Nora called back, in a tone that communicated she had also heard every other human preference in this house for the last 11 years and did not require narration. Sable made a small sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh. She caught it and swallowed it, but not quite fast enough. Corbin pretended not to notice. They ate together in a silence that was, for the first time, almost comfortable. Then Sable set down her fork and said, without preamble, "My mama knew things about you." Corbin's hand stilled on his coffee cup. "What do you mean?" He kept his voice careful, neutral, the way you keep your body still when a bird lands close. "She had a picture of your building," Sable said. "The tall one downtown with the W. She showed it to me once." Her eyes came up to his. "She said she used to walk past it on her way to the hospital." "To the hospital?" "When she was sick." Sable touched the necklace at her throat, that reflex again, automatic as breathing. "She was in the hospital a long time before she died. They had a TV in the waiting room. She said she saw you on it." A pause. "She said she recognized your face." Corbin leaned forward slowly. "Recognized it how, Sable? Did she ever say?" Sable's dark eyes held his. There was something moving behind them, a decision being tested, turned over, held up to the light. "She said—" She stopped, looked down at the necklace. "She said you were the father." The breakfast room went very quiet. "The father," Corbin repeated. "The father of whom?" But Sable had retreated. Something had spooked her, some instinct, some old protection. She picked up her fork and went back to her eggs, and her face closed like a shutter, and Corbin knew with absolute certainty that he had just touched the edge of the secret. The very edge. And it was bigger than he'd imagined. That afternoon, Randall Fitch called from somewhere that sounded like a parking garage. "I pulled the hospital records from Hartford General," Fitch said. "Cecile Voss was admitted the night of October 14th, same night as your accident. She was in the ER for 4 days. But here's the thing, Mr. Westfall." A pause filled with road noise and crackling. "She wasn't just admitted for the accident injuries. There was an existing file on her. She'd been a patient at Hartford General before, approximately 8 months prior, outpatient, and the department listed on that prior visit." Another pause. Fitch was good with pauses, knew how to make a man lean in. Obstetrics. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. How old is the obstetrics record? Corbin asked. 7 years and 8 months, Fitch said. Corbin did the math without wanting to. Sable was 7. Keep pulling, he said. Everything. Every record. Every connection. He hung up and sat very still in his office, with the sound of Sable drawing quietly in the next room, and the feeling that the ground beneath his entire understanding of the past 2 years had just shifted, incrementally, irrevocably, 1 degree off true. On the 5th morning, Sable came to breakfast carrying something. It was a small cloth bag. Faded green canvas, the kind used for keeping toiletries, barely larger than her 2 fists pressed together. She set it on the table beside her orange juice with a deliberateness that told Corbin this was not casual. She had thought about this. He waited. She ate half her eggs, drank her juice. Then she put both hands flat on the cloth bag and looked at him. My mama said if I ever found someone who really needed to know the truth, Sable said slowly, with the cadence of a child reciting something memorized, I should give them this. Her eyes were steady on his. I think you really need to know. Corbin's heart was very loud in the silence of the breakfast room. Can I look? He asked. She nodded and slid it across the table. He opened it carefully. Inside, a folded piece of paper, soft at the creases from handling. A small photograph, face down, and a hospital bracelet, the disposable kind, plastic with printed text, the sort they put on newborns. He looked at the bracelet first. The printed text read, Baby Girl Voss. Dobb. March 3rd. Hartford General Hospital. He set it down. He was breathing very carefully. He turned over the photograph. It was a snapshot, the cheap kind printed at a drugstore, slightly overexposed. 2 women, young, standing in a hospital hallway. One was a stranger to him, dark-haired, thin, smiling with the particular exhausted joy of someone who had just given birth. He would learn, in about 40 seconds, that this was Cecile Voss, the other woman he knew. He knew her face the way he knew the sound of his own heartbeat, intimately, permanently, from a place that lived below language. It was Diane, Alara's mother, his partner of 6 years. Dead now 3 years, from a cancer that had moved too fast for anyone to stop. Standing in a hospital hallway with Cecile Voss, arms around each other, both of them smiling. Corbin stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he unfolded the piece of paper. It was a letter. Handwritten in careful, slightly uneven script. The handwriting of someone who had learned to write without much formal schooling and had worked hard to make the letters neat. It began, To whoever my daughter brings this to. He got 3 lines in and had to stop. He pressed one hand over his mouth. He looked out the window at the bare October trees. He sat very still until he was certain, mostly certain, he could continue. Sable was watching him with those dark eyes. Not afraid, exactly. But ready, the way children are ready when they have been carrying something too heavy and are finally, carefully, setting it down. Is it important? She asked quietly. Yes, Corbin said. His voice was barely there. It's very important. He read the rest of the letter. By the end, he understood why the necklace existed. He understood why Sable had it. And he understood, in the first raw, incomplete way you understand something before you've had time to fully feel it, that the accident 2 years ago had not been the beginning of this story. It had been the middle. The beginning had happened 7 years ago, in a hospital room, between 2 women he had loved, and one secret they had kept from him. The question, the open, aching question he could not yet answer, was why. Randall Fitch arrived at the estate at noon. He was a lean man in his early 50s, the kind of lean that came from years of skipped meals and constant motion rather than discipline. He had the face of someone who had seen most of what human beings were capable of and had made a professional peace with it. He carried a second folder, thicker than the first, and set it on Corbin's desk without ceremony. Cecile Voss worked as a home health aide, Fitch began. Before that, years ago, she worked as an administrative assistant at a private fertility clinic in Burlington, Vermont, the Harmon Center. Closed now. The owner retired in 2018, but the records exist. He tapped the folder. I pulled them. Corbin looked at the folder. His hands were still. The Harmon Center, Fitch continued, provided donor services, including egg donation. He met Corbin's eyes with the direct steadiness of a man delivering a verdict. Diane Westfall, your partner, was registered with the Harmon Center as an egg recipient. Approximately 8 years ago, she was in early-stage premature ovarian failure. She used a donor. The room was absolutely still. The donor, Corbin said, was Cecile Voss. There it was. The thing that had been building for 5 days, gathering mass and gravity at the bottom of everything, finally surfacing. Diane had used a donor egg to conceive Ilara. Cecile Voss had been that donor. Ilara and Sable, born of the same biological mother, 18 months apart, were sisters. Half-sisters by genetics, though neither had ever known the other existed. Cecile had known. She had worked at the clinic. She had known whose embryo she'd contributed to. And somehow, through the years, through coincidence or searching or some combination of both, she had found her way to Hartford, to the shadow of Corbin's building, to a TV screen in a hospital waiting room where she saw his face. She said she recognized your face. She said you were the father. The letter. The letter in the cloth bag, in Sable's careful keeping for 2 years, began to make terrible, complete, heartbreaking sense. Cecile had been dying in that hospital when she wrote it. She'd known she wouldn't recover. She had written to whoever her daughter found, hoping, trusting, betting everything on the fragile chance that Sable would eventually find her way to Corbin Westfall, to Ilara's father, to the man who had unknowingly helped create, through Diane, the biological half-sister of the child sleeping in his east wing. The necklace was not Ilara's. Or rather, it was, and it wasn't. Corbin had bought 2 necklaces, not one. He had forgotten this, or perhaps never fully processed it, in the catastrophic weight of grief. Diane had given one to Ilara. The matching piece, she had kept the second, and she had quietly, without telling Corbin, mailed it to the clinic's records address, with a note asking them to pass it to the donor, if they ever could. The clinic had forwarded it to Cecile. Cecile had kept it for years, and when she lay dying, she had placed it around her daughter's neck, and asked that daughter to be brave, and told her to find the right person to give the letter to. A 7-year-old girl had done exactly that. Corbin sat with all of it, the full shape of it, for a long, long time. Fitch had gone quiet, giving him the room to absorb. It was Draven who eventually spoke from the doorway, in a voice carefully emptied of anything except the facts. "Sir, the girl is asking for you. She wants to show you a drawing she made." Corbin looked up. Down the hall, in the east room where he had once carried his daughter to sleep, a child who shared her blood was waiting with a piece of paper and a crayon, and the shy, enormous hope of someone who has been alone too long. He pressed both hands flat on the desk. He stood. He had not stood without assistance since the accident. He had not had the will to try. He stood anyway. And when his legs held, barely, shaking but holding, he took one step, and then another, toward the hallway, toward the east room, toward a 7-year-old girl who carried the last living piece of everything he had lost. But even now, even with the letter, the records, the photograph, there was still one thing he didn't know. One thing Sable had not yet told him. Something her mother had whispered to her in that hospital room, in the last hour, when the world was going quiet, and Cecile Voss had held her daughter's face in both hands and said, "Baby, there's one more thing you need to give him. When you know he's ready." She still had it. And Sable had decided, watching Corbin Westphal stand on his shaking legs and walk toward her for the first time, that he was almost ready. Almost. The physical therapist's name was Jonah Price, and he had the polite, persistent energy of a man who had been told no 1,000 times and had simply never learned what the word meant. For 2 years he had come to the Westphal estate 3 mornings a week. For 2 years Corbin had gone through the sessions with the mechanical compliance of someone fulfilling an obligation he had already decided was pointless. He did the exercises. He used the parallel bars. He sat in the therapeutic pool. He made no meaningful progress. And Jonah kept coming anyway, and neither of them spoke about the fact that Corbin's real injury was not in his spine. The morning after Sable showed him her drawing, a house with a large tree in front, 4 windows and a blue door, 2 figures standing outside, one in a wheelchair and one very small. Corbin asked Jonah to come an extra day. Jonah arrived Tuesday morning at 7 and found Corbin already in the therapy room, which had not happened once in 2 years. "What changed?" Jonah asked, because he was the kind of man who asked. Corbin looked at the parallel bars. "I have a reason," he said. Jonah nodded once and did not ask for details. He understood, in the way of good therapists and good soldiers, that the reason was none of his business and all of his business simultaneously. They worked for 90 minutes. Corbin stood for 43 seconds unassisted, 11 seconds longer than his previous record. When he sat back down, his hands were shaking, and his jaw was set hard against something that was partly pain and partly something else, older and larger. Down the hall, Sable was at the breakfast table with Nora, asking with complete seriousness whether pancakes could be made in shapes other than circles. It was Leland who brought the problem. He arrived at 2 that afternoon with the leather briefcase and the expression that meant human and not professional. But this time the human thing was harder. He sat down and folded his hands and said carefully, "The state received a report." Corbin went still. "An anonymous call to Child Protective Services. Yesterday morning." Leland kept his voice even. "Reporting an unregistered minor living in a private residence without formal custody arrangement. A caseworker has been assigned. She'll want to visit within the week." The silence in the office was the particular kind that comes just before something moves. "Who called?" Corbin asked. "Anonymous tips don't come with names," Leland said. "Fitch can find the name." "Probably." A pause. "But that's not the priority right now. The priority is that we have no legal standing to keep Sable here. You took her in informally, which was the right thing, but it's not a documented arrangement. If the caseworker decides the environment is inappropriate or that placement elsewhere is in the child's interest, it isn't. Corbin. Gentle. Firm. I know that, but the state doesn't know that. To the state, she's an unregistered child in the home of a single adult male with no biological or legal relationship to her." He let that sit for a moment. "I need to file for emergency guardianship. Today, if possible. I need you to be prepared for a home evaluation, a background check, an interview, and possibly a custody hearing." Corbin thought of the drawing. The house with the blue door, 2 figures outside. "File it," he said. "Whatever it takes." Leland opened the briefcase. "There's one more thing. Fitch's report came in this morning." He slid a single sheet across the desk. "He found something in Diane's files. Something you should see." Corbin looked down at the paper. It was a scan of a handwritten envelope. The return address was Hartford General Hospital. The postmark was dated 5 months before Diane died. It was addressed in Diane's handwriting to Cecile Voss. That night, Corbin sat outside Sable's room for 20 minutes after she fell asleep, the door open a crack, listening to the house be quiet around her. He thought about Diane writing that envelope with her thinning hands, the pen she always held at that odd angle, the particular way she pressed hard on every downstroke. Writing to a woman she had never told him about. He was not angry. He understood, he thought, why Diane had kept it separate. The donation, the arrangement, the private correspondence. She had been trying to protect him from a complexity she didn't know how to explain. But she had also been trying in her quiet way to make sure no one fell through the cracks. She had known Cecile. She had been in contact, which meant the letter in the cloth bag, the one Cecile had written to the person Sable would find, was very possibly written in response to one that Diane had sent first. There was a circle here, a long, careful, heartbroken circle, and Fitch had not yet found the letter Diane had written, but someone, Corbin suspected, had. Someone had found it before he did, and that person had made a phone call to Child Protective Services. Fitch found the second letter on a Thursday, not in Cecile's hospital records, not in the clinic's files. He found it in a storage unit in West Hartford, rented under Cecile's name, and paid 18 months in advance, prepaid before her death, as if she had arranged it deliberately, as if she had known someone might come looking and had wanted to make sure something survived. Inside the unit, 3 boxes, clothes mostly, Sable's drawings from before she was homeless, dozens of them, carefully folded, a child's Bible, and at the bottom of the third box, inside a waterproof plastic sleeve, a letter on cream stationery in Diane's handwriting, dated 14 months before the accident. Fitch photographed every page and sent the images to Corbin at 6 in the morning. Corbin read it 3 times before he moved. Diane's letter to Cecile was 4 pages long. It was written with the particular clarity of someone who knows they are dying and has decided to spend their remaining words precisely, without waste. It began with gratitude for the donation, for Ilara, for the gift of a child when the doctors had said none was possible. It moved, in the second page, into something more complex, an acknowledgement that Cecile had a daughter of her own, that Diane had known, through the clinic's records which she had quietly obtained, that Cecile had given birth 8 months after the donation, that Ilara had a biological half-sister in the world. "I cannot tell Corbin yet," Diane had written. "He would want to do everything immediately, bring her in, arrange it all. That is who he is. But this needs to be done gently, in the right time, and I may not have enough time left to do it gently. So I am writing to you instead." She had asked Cecile to make contact when Sable was older. She had described the necklace. She had sent the matching piece to the clinic, hoping they would forward it. She had written, "If anything happens to me before we can do this properly, please find a way to bring her to Corbin. He is a hard man in some ways, but he is a good father. He loved Ilara more than I have words to say. He will love your daughter too. I promise you that." Then, the last paragraph. The one that changed the shape of everything. "There is something else you should know, something I only recently discovered, and I am still deciding whether to act on it. I believe I will be gone before I act, so I am placing it in your hands instead, and I am sorry for the weight of it." The letter ended there. Page 4 was missing. Corbin stared at the photograph of the final page, cut cleanly, not torn, removed with scissors, and understood with absolute certainty that the missing page had not been lost. It had been taken. He called Fitch. "Who else has access to that unit?" "No one should," Fitch said. "But the rental company keeps a spare key on file. Standard procedure. Pull the access log." 40 minutes later, Fitch called back. "The unit was accessed 7 months ago," he said. "Single entry, after hours." A pause. One of Fitch's deliberate, weighted pauses. "The rental agreement has a secondary authorized contact listed, someone who co-signed the prepaid arrangement with Cecile." "Who?" Fitch said the name. Corbin had known it before he heard it. He had felt it coming for days, the way you feel weather before it arrives, a pressure change in everything around you. "Victor?" he said, not a question. "Victor Ashby," Fitch confirmed. Victor Ashby was 44 years old, Corbin's first cousin and chief operating officer of Westfall Group, the man who had run the company during the 14 months Corbin spent in and out of rehabilitation facilities after the accident. He was polished, precise, charming in the specific way of people who have studied charm rather than felt it. He had sent flowers after Alara's funeral. He had managed the business with admirable, attentive efficiency. He had also, apparently, known about Cecile Voss, known about Sable, known that Diane had been in contact with Cecile and had a plan, and he had done nothing. For 2 years he had done nothing. The question, the one that sat in Corbin's chest like something cold, was whether Victor's silence had been passive neglect or something deliberate. Corbin did not yet call Victor. Instead, he went to find Sable. She was in the breakfast room, in her preferred spot of morning light, and she looked up when he came in with an expression of pleased, careful welcome that she was only recently allowing herself to show. It made him feel, very specifically, like a man who has been standing in winter for a very long time and has just stepped inside. "Sable," he said, sitting across from her. "The cloth bag your mama gave you." He chose his words slowly. "You said there was one more thing, something she told you to give me when I was ready." He held her gaze. "I think I'm ready." Sable looked at him for a long, searching moment. Then she reached into the front pocket of her sweater. She had been carrying it on her, he realized. All along, she had been carrying it. She placed it on the table between them. It was a folded piece of cream stationery, page 4 of Diane's letter. The page was not long. Diane's handwriting filled less than half of it, and the last lines trailed off slightly. The hand of someone very tired, near the end. Corbin read it once. Then he laid it flat on the table and pressed both palms over it, not to hide it, but because he needed to touch something solid. "There is a man," Diane had written, "who has been watching Corbin's business more closely than a cousin should. I have seen things. In the accounts, in the decisions made during my illness when Corbin was distracted with my care. Victor is patient, and he is careful, and I cannot prove anything yet. But I am afraid, Cecile. I am afraid that when I am gone, and Corbin is alone and grieving, there will be no one to watch for what I have been watching. If Sable comes to Corbin, she will need to know this, because Victor will feel threatened by her presence. A daughter, even an informal one, changes the inheritance, changes the control. He will try to remove her. Please make sure whoever finds this letter understands. If anyone moves to separate Corbin from your daughter, look first at Victor Ashby." Corbin sat with the page for a long time. He thought about the anonymous call to Child Protective Services. He thought about a storage unit accessed 7 months ago, page 4 removed with scissors. He thought about 14 months of Victor running Westfall Group while Corbin was broken and raw and barely present, and how smoothly it had all gone, how attentive Victor had been, how perfectly positioned. Grief, Corbin understood now, is not just an emotion. It is also a condition, a state of compromised perception in which you trust the people closest to you more, not less, because you are too exhausted to suspect. Victor had known this. Victor had waited inside that grief like a man waiting inside a fog, patient and invisible. Corbin called Leland. "I need the full financial audit," he said. "Everything from 18 months ago to present. Not the quarterly review, the full audit, transaction by transaction." A silence. "Corbin, that's a considerable." "Today, Leland." Another silence. "I'll get the firm on it." He hung up and looked at Sable, who had watched him read the letter with the careful patience of a child who has learned that important things take time and that the right response to important things is stillness. "Did your mama tell you what was in that page?" he asked. Sable shook her head slowly. "She just said it was important. She said the person I gave it to would know what to do." Corbin nodded. "Your mama," he said carefully, "was a very brave woman." Sable touched the necklace. "I know," she said softly. "She told me that too." The caseworker's name was Beverly Crane, mid-40s, unhurried, with the observant neutrality of someone who had sat in 1,000 living rooms and learned to read a home in 10 minutes. She arrived on a Friday afternoon, accepted tea, and spent 4 hours in the estate. She interviewed Corbin. She walked through the house. She spoke with Nora and with Draven. And she spent 40 minutes alone with Sable in the breakfast room, while Corbin sat in the hallway outside and did not check his phone once. When Beverly emerged, her professional neutrality had softened almost invisibly at the edges. "She drew me a picture," Beverly said. "She does that," Corbin said. Beverly looked down at the paper in her hand. Corbin caught a glimpse of it. A woman with a briefcase, a small dark-haired girl, and in the background, clearly and deliberately, a house with a blue door. "She told me this is her home now," Beverly said. She was very specific about the word now, like she wanted to make sure I understood it was permanent. Corbin said nothing. Beverly tucked the drawing carefully into her folder. "I'll submit my report by Monday," she said. "I don't anticipate recommending removal." After she left, Corbin sat for a long time in the hallway. Down the hall, Sable was singing something to herself. Quiet, slightly off-key, entirely unself-conscious. He did not move for quite a while. He simply sat and listened to her sing and felt something shift in him, not like breaking, but like thawing, slow, necessary, and entirely out of his control. The audit results would arrive Monday. Victor did not yet know that Corbin knew, and Fitch, still pulling threads, had just found something in the accident report from 2 years ago that made no sense. A detail so small, it had been buried in the supplemental files, overlooked by everyone, including Corbin. The name of the company that had catered the event where the other driver, Marcus Toll, had spent the 3 hours before he ran the red light. The company was a subsidiary of Westfall Group. The event had been organized internally by Victor Ashby. Monday arrived like a verdict. The audit landed at 8 in the morning, 40 pages of annotated transactions, flagged entries, and a 7-paragraph summary that Leland had clearly composed while angry, because the language was clipped and precise in a way that meant he was controlling something. In 2.5 years, beginning 4 months after Diane's death, when Corbin had been at his most absent, most hollowed, Victor Ashby had orchestrated a slow, methodical redistribution of Westfall Group's peripheral assets. Not theft, exactly. Nothing so blunt. Restructured subsidiaries, adjusted partnership agreements, compensation arrangements quietly rewritten. Moves that required the kind of intimate access only a trusted executive could have. Moves that, individually, could be explained. Collectively, they told a single story. Victor was building himself a position from which, if certain things went a certain way, he would not need Corbin at all. The event catering connection had gone to Fitch, who confirmed it in a call at 9. Marcus Toll, the driver who had crossed the center line on October 14th 2 years ago, killing Alara and putting Corbin in a wheelchair, had been the guest of honor at a retirement dinner that night. A long-tenured employee at a small distribution company. The dinner had been arranged and paid for by the distribution company's parent organization, which was a subsidiary of Westfall Group, which had been, at that time, 4 months into Victor Ashby's quiet operational expansion. Marcus Toll had been served 8 glasses of wine over 3 hours. The event coordinator on record, the person who had approved the menu, the venue, the open bar, was Victor Ashby's personal assistant. There was no direct line from Victor to the accident. No evidence he had intended any specific harm, but there was a line from his decisions. The event, the open bar, the late ending, to a man who drove drunk, to a red light, to a car crash, to a white casket, to a wheelchair. And Victor had known about Cecile, had found the storage unit, had removed the page, had made the call to Child Protective Services. He had stood at the graveside and held Corbin by the shoulder and said, "I've got the company. Don't worry about anything. Just take the time you need." And then he had gone back to the office and used that time. Corbin read the audit twice. He read Fitch's report. He sat very still at his desk for 17 minutes. Then he called Victor and asked him to come to the estate. Victor arrived at 11:30 in a car that cost more than most families earned in a year. He walked into the study with the comfortable authority of a man who had been walking into this room for 2 decades and had never once felt unwelcome. He accepted the chair across the desk. He crossed one leg over the other. He smiled. "You look better," he said. "Someone told me you've been doing more physical therapy. That's good, Corbin. Really good." Corbin looked at him. He had known Victor since childhood, had trusted him the way you trust the landscape, reflexively, without deciding to. He had handed him the company in the worst year of his life without a second thought. He placed the audit on the desk and turned it so Victor could read the cover page. He watched Victor's face. The smile held for 3 full seconds. A trained, professional thing. Then it settled into something more careful. "This is a standard review," Victor said. "It's not standard," Corbin said. "And you know it isn't." A pause. Victor recrossed his legs. "Whatever you think you found, Corbin, there are explanations. The reorganizations were strategic. The partnerships needed updating. You weren't available." "The storage unit," Corbin said. Victor went still. "Cecile Voss," Corbin continued. "West Hartford. You co-signed the rental agreement. You accessed it 7 months ago. You took a page from a letter." A long silence. Outside the window, Sable was in the garden with Nora, trying to convince a small brown bird to eat from her hand. Corbin could see them through the glass. The small girl, perfectly still, arm extended, face lit with the particular hope of children who have not yet entirely given up on impossible things. "You knew about Sable," Corbin said. "Before I found her. You knew Diane had been in contact with Cecile. You knew there was a child." Victor looked at him for a long time. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly, but the closest neighbor to it. "I found Diane's letter to Cecile in the estate files," Victor said finally. His voice had changed. The polish was gone. What remained was flatter, older. "After she died, before you were well enough to go through her things, I was managing the estate and I found it." He looked at the desk. "I should have told you." "Yes," Corbin said. "You should have. You were in no condition. That was not your decision to make." The words came out quiet, not shouted, the quietest he had said anything all morning, and somehow that made them hit harder. Victor looked up, and for a moment, just a moment, Corbin saw something real there. Something tired and cornered, and underneath all of it, frightened. "The event," Corbin said. "Marcus Toll." Victor's face went white. "I'm not saying it was intentional," Corbin said. "I am saying it happened because of decisions you made. And I am saying you knew that. After the accident, you knew, and you said nothing." The silence stretched between them like a fault line. "I want your resignation from Westfall Group," Corbin said. "Full terms package, whatever Leland calculates as fair. The asset reorganizations will be reviewed and reversed where necessary. And you will not contact me or my household or Sable Voss again." Victor opened his mouth, closed it. He looked out the window, at the garden, at the small girl still holding out her hand to the bird. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He walked to the door. "I'm sorry," he said from the doorway, and then he left. Corbin sat for a long time in the empty study. In the garden, the small brown bird had landed on Sable's extended hand. She had gone so perfectly still, so perfectly patient, that the impossible thing had happened. Corbin watched her and breathed. The days after Victor's departure settled like weather after a storm. Not immediately warm, but cleaner, sharper, the kind of air you can actually breathe. Leland filed the emergency guardianship petition on Tuesday. The judge, a woman named Honorable Ruth Calloway, who Beverly Crane had described, off the record, as someone with excellent instincts, granted the temporary order within 48 hours. Full hearing was set for 6 weeks out. Corbyn's physical therapist, Jonah, began coming 5 mornings a week instead of 3. By the end of the second week, Corbyn was walking the length of the therapy room unassisted. By the end of the third, he was walking to the breakfast room under his own power, arriving before Sable, who came in each morning and saw him standing at the window and gave him the same look every time. Not surprise, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that looked a lot like recognition, like she had known it was possible before he had. "You're getting better," she told him one morning, with the directness of children and generals. "I am," he said. She sat down at the table. Nora put scrambled eggs in front of her. She ate 3 bites, then looked up. "Are you happy?" she asked. It was not a child's question. It was the question of someone who had spent a long time learning to read people's weather, to know what they were really feeling underneath the words they said. Corbyn considered it seriously, the way she deserved. "I'm getting there," he said. She nodded once and went back to her eggs. Satisfied, apparently, with the honesty. Fitch closed his formal investigation on a Thursday and delivered his final report in person. He sat across from Corbyn in the study and went through it page by page. The full picture, assembled from hospital records. Clinic files, storage unit contents, catering logs, access records, and the long, patient thread of 2 women who had known each other through extraordinary circumstances and had, in their separate ways, tried to do right by people they loved. At the end, Fitch closed the folder. "I want to tell you something off the record," he said. It was the first personal thing he had offered in 3 weeks of work. "Go ahead," Corbyn said. "I've been doing this for 22 years. Private investigation, before that FBI, before that Army intelligence. I have sat in a lot of studies across from a lot of people who were in the middle of hard things." He looked at Corbyn directly. "I have never worked a case where a dying woman trusted a 7-year-old child with this much, and the child carried it perfectly." A pause. "That girl is something remarkable." Corbyn looked out the window. The October trees had given way to November, grey and clean, and Sable was in the garden with her coat on, sitting cross-legged on the cold ground, drawing in a notebook Nora had bought her. "I know," he said. On a Thursday evening, 3 weeks into the guardianship period, Corbyn knocked on the door of Sable's room. She was at the small desk by the window, drawing. She turned around when he came in and waited with that patient, watchful expression. He sat on the edge of the bed, sitting, standing. It was easier now, more natural. He rested his hands on his knees. "I want to tell you some things," he said. "About your mama, about someone named Diane, about why you have that necklace." He kept his voice steady. "About where you came from. You're old enough to know, I think. And you deserve to know." Sable swiveled her chair to face him fully. He told her everything. He tried to use words she could hold, simple words, true words, without softening the weight of them, but without dropping that weight all at once either. He told her about Diane and the clinic. He told her about Ilara. He told her what the necklace meant, and why there were 2, and how Diane had written to Cecile, and how Cecile had written back, and how all of it had moved through years and loss and distance and ended here, in this room, on this evening, with both of them looking at each other. When he was done, Sable was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "So Ilara was my sister." "Yes," Corbyn said, "in a way that matters. And Diane was like part of my family too." "Yes." She looked down at the necklace. She lifted it with one hand and held the pendant in her palm, looking at the blue stone in the evening light. "They wanted us to find each other," she said. "Not a question." "I think they did everything they could to make sure we did," he said. Sable was quiet again. Then she looked up at him with those dark, careful eyes that had seen too much, and somehow, impossibly, were not hardened by it. "Then I'm glad we did," she said. Corbyn nodded. He did not trust himself to speak for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" he said. when he could. "Yes. The drawing you made," he said. "The first one. The house with the blue door and the two people outside." He paused. "You drew that on the third day." Sable looked at him. A small, considered smile, the kind she gave rarely, and only when she had decided something definitively. "I knew it was going to be my home," she said simply. "I just wanted to make sure you knew it too." Corbin sat with that for a long moment. Outside, the November wind moved through the bare trees. Inside, the house was warm and quiet and full. He had one thing left to do. One formal, official, permanent thing. The hearing was in 3 weeks, and then there was the chapter 12 of his life. The one he had not been able to imagine, not from a sidewalk in October, not from a wheelchair, not from the long and lightless place grief had kept him. He was beginning now to see it. The morning of the guardianship hearing, Corbin Westfall woke before sunrise. He lay still for a moment, listening to the house. The old radiators ticking against the December cold, the bare branches of the elm tree outside his window moving in the early wind. And from down the hall, faint but there, the sound of Sable already awake. He could tell from the creak of the floorboard nearest her desk that she was drawing again, the way she always drew when something was large inside her and she needed to put it somewhere. He got up without the chair. He had not used the wheelchair inside the house in 11 days. He dressed slowly and walked to her door and knocked. "Come in," she said, in the small, certain voice that still, every time, did something to the center of his chest. She was at her desk in the gray pre-dawn light, bent over a piece of paper with a red crayon. She looked up when he came in. She was wearing the sweater Nora had bought her, dark green, slightly too big, the sleeves folded back, and the necklace, as always, at her throat. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "I slept fine," she said. "I just woke up early because today is important." He sat on the edge of her bed and looked at what she was drawing. A courthouse, rendered with the serious architectural ambition of a 7-year-old who had decided the building deserved all 4 of its columns. 2 figures on the steps, one tall, one small, both facing forward. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Sable considered the question, the way she considered all serious questions, fully, without rushing. "Like when you're about to get something you've been waiting for," she said. "Nervous but not scared." "That's exactly how I feel," he said. She looked up at him. Then she held out the drawing. "For you," she said. "For today." He took it carefully in both hands. The courthouse. The 2 figures. Above them, in careful block letters that listed slightly to the left, she had written 4 words. "We belong to each other." He looked at it for a long time. "Thank you," he said. The words were not enough, but they were what he had. Sable turned back to the desk and picked up the red crayon again. "Nora said breakfast is at 7:30, she said. "She's making the good eggs." "Not runny," Corbin said. "Not runny," Sable confirmed, with great seriousness. He stood. He walked to the door. And then he stopped, because there was something he needed to say before they got to the courthouse, and the judge, and the formal language that would make official what had already been true for weeks, maybe since the very first morning, when a small girl had looked up at him from a flattened piece of cardboard and decided, with the extraordinary courage of someone who had nothing left to lose, to trust him. "Sable," she turned. "Whatever the judge says today," he said, "you are already home. That has already happened. Nothing today changes it or makes it more real. I just want you to know that." She looked at him with those dark, patient eyes. "I know," she said. "I've known that since day 3. He almost laughed. It came out as something between a breath and a smile. She had told him this before, and it still landed the same way, like the truest thing anyone had ever said to him. The Honorable Ruth Calloway had a small American flag on the corner of her bench, and reading glasses she removed and replaced with great deliberateness, as if every action in her courtroom deserved proper attention. The hearing room was smaller than Corbin had expected. Pale wood paneling, fluorescent warmth, 4 rows of gallery seats of which only the front 2 were occupied. Leland Cross sat beside Corbin at the petitioner's table. Beverly Crane sat 2 rows back, her folder on her lap, her expression giving nothing away and somehow giving away everything. Sable sat between Corbin and Leland, her feet not quite reaching the floor, her hands folded on the table in front of her in the particular way she had of being still, not the stillness of anxiety, but the deep, grounded stillness of someone paying full attention. Judge Calloway read through the petition. She asked Leland 2 questions. She looked at Beverly's report, which she had clearly already read in detail because she turned directly to the relevant pages without searching. Then she folded her hands and looked down from the bench, not at Corbin, but at Sable. "Sable," she said. Her voice was unhurried, warm in the way of people who have genuinely chosen the right profession. "I'd like to ask you one question, if that's all right." Sable looked up at her with composure that made Leland, on her left, press his lips together quietly. "Is this where you want to be?" Judge Calloway asked. "With Mr. Westfall, in his home. Is that what you want?" Sable did not hesitate. "Yes," she said. "He needs someone to make sure he eats breakfast, and I need somewhere with a blue door." A silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds and contained within it the compressed weight of every hard thing that had brought both of them to this room. Cecile's courage, Diane's foresight, 2 years of grief and misdirection and slow, patient love assembling itself in the dark. Judge Calloway removed her glasses. She wrote something on the document in front of her. She signed it. "Temporary guardianship is hereby made permanent," she said. "Congratulations to you both." Corbin put his hand over Sable's on the table. She turned her hand over and held his, a small hand and a large one, brown and pale, linked across the pale wood of the table while the judge added her formal seal and Leland Cross, for the first time in 30 years of family law, appeared to be experiencing some difficulty with his composure. They went to lunch after, a real lunch, at a restaurant with white tablecloths that Sable studied with visible approval, as if she had always known she deserved white tablecloths and was pleased the universe had finally caught up. She ordered soup and a grilled cheese and ate methodically and with great contentment, and asked the waiter 3 questions about how the kitchen was organized, and he answered all of them with complete seriousness, because something about Sable made adults instinctively address her as someone whose questions mattered. Nora was waiting at the house when they got back, and had made the sort of dinner that required 3 pots and a significant amount of butter, and the estate smelled extraordinary when they came through the door. The blue door, newly painted, at Sable's specific request, 2 weeks earlier. That night, after dinner, after Sable had been tucked in and had fallen asleep almost immediately with the deep animal peace of a child who is finally, thoroughly, safe, Corbin sat in his study with a glass of water and the drawing from that morning on the desk in front of him. We belong to each other. He thought about Diane, about the letter she had written with thinning hands, trying to arrange one last careful thing before she ran out of time. He thought about Cecile Voss, who had walked past his building on her way to a hospital where she was told she would not recover, and had looked up at the W on the side of it, and understood that her daughter would need a direction to walk in someday. He thought about a sidewalk in October, about a blue stone in morning light, about the way some things, the important things, the true things, will find their way through any amount of darkness, will travel through years and loss and silence and still arrive, eventually, exactly where they were always meant to go. He thought about Ilara. He let himself do that, fully, without flinching. He let himself remember the weight of her at 4 years old, asleep against his shoulder, the sound of her laugh, the way she had held the necklace pendant in her fist when she was thinking hard about something. He held all of it, and it hurt the way it always hurt. But underneath the hurt tonight, there was something else. Something that had not been there before. She has a sister, he thought. Ilara has a sister, and she is down the hall. He was not a man given to metaphysics or the comfort of imagined continuity, but he was a man who had held a necklace at a graveside and placed it with shaking hands on a small girl in a white dress, and he was a man who had then, 2 years later, seen that necklace shining in October light on the throat of another small girl who shared his daughter's blood. Some things cannot be explained by audit reports or hospital records, or the careful work of private investigators. Some things are simply, stubbornly, undeniably true. He folded the drawing carefully. He placed it in the top drawer of his desk, beside the photograph of Ilara on the porch with her arms wide open. Then he stood, steadily, fully, without assistance, and turned off the light. In the east wing, Sable slept. The blue door was closed against the December cold, and the house was warm on both sides of it, and Corbin Westfall walked down the hall in the dark, past a drawing of a courthouse and 2 figures on the steps, past the breakfast room where 2 chairs were pulled close to the window, past all the ordinary, extraordinary evidence of a life that had cracked open and, against every expectation, let something in. He stood for a moment outside her door. He listened to the house, no longer grey and heavy, no longer a place where things ended. Then he walked back to his room, and lay down, and slept. Some mornings, you reach across the empty space beside you, and you remember what is gone. And some mornings, the ones you did not know to hope for, you hear a small voice from down the hall, asking whether pancakes can be made in shapes other than circles, and you understand that the reaching, and the remembering, and the loving do not cancel each other out. They live together. All of it together. That is the gift. The strange, costly, irreplaceable gift. That is what love, patient enough, brave enough, willing to be carried by a 7-year-old girl across 2 years of sidewalks and sleepless nights, looks like when it finally finds its way home.